Just the mere mention of the word asbestos is enough to send home buyers fleeing. So, what exactly is this issue of asbestos? We had an info session with David Eslin at Inspect Canada on asbestos, and here is what he had to say.
Asbestos. So I do have a little bit of asbestos here for you guys. So this one here, this is the old asbestos siding. It was very popular on houses. It's like a concrete. If you would drop it, it would break. It's almost the same as what we're getting nowadays for the hardy board. Hardy board is also a concrete type product, except that this one, the guys that would cut it over and over, eventually the dust would kill them. So over here, this is vermiculite insulation. This is what you can find in attic spaces that are very old. It also comes in different sizes. This one is kind of a thick one, but sometimes it comes, it's very powdery. And then, the best is to leave it undisturbed, but some people do decide to close them up. So if at one point, if this is an old home and you got this ceiling, and old homes had no lighting in there, it's got one light in the corner or whatever, and you want to have pot lights all over the place. Now, if you're going to start poking holes in the ceiling, there'll be some of that vermiculite that will start coming down on your face basically while you're doing it, right? So that's when people have to, do things professionally and just make sure this, because now you're also contaminating the home. If the carpet in the living room has some, every time you walk there, it goes airborne. You don't even see it. You're constantly breathing this stuff. And the problem, well, not the problem, but the thing with asbestos is it kills people in the future. So actually, I think it's roughly 35 to 40 years later. So if you're already in your 50s, you can play with it, no problem. Eventually something will kill you in your 90s anyways, right? But anyway, so that's what happened. It's people who worked in the environment for many years, once they start retiring, bam, shit start hitting the fan, and now they can't breathe and they have a hard time. And so it's a big thing. It's a big thing out there. You got to be careful with it. And then so it was in everything. At one point, the older the home, the more you'll have. So just keep that in mind. But again, it's not a big concern. It's just when you do a demo. Okay. Now, yeah.
What's the price range?
Yeah, so well, it depends what it would be. So if it's vermiculite in your attic, for example, I've heard guys, and it's not a big attic, and those are normally never big homes either, because they're older homes and stuff like that. It can be in the $20,000 range to remove it. Some guy, and then it's because, to tell you the truth, it's like they're milking it a little tiny bit. Like the guy that does that, like they charge crazy amount of money. Like, and it's it's kind of crazy how they do it. Yeah, they'll just go totally overboard, and they'll make sure it's very expensive. So that's why in most cases it's best just to leave it. For example, let's say your ceiling, you're pretty sure you got it tested, it's got asbestos all over the place, and you want to do a lot of work on that ceiling. Well, there's two options. You can either pull the whole thing off and get rid of it and do this whole thing, or you just throw another layer of drywall right on top of it and you forget about it, right? That's why in the floor, if it's a concrete, you got an old tile that has asbestos in the glue and everything, you don't go and chip all this stuff off. You just throw your floor right on top of it. So in most cases, yeah, the disposal, it's not really needed. Or I would try to avoid it at all costs anyways, because again, it's an old home. This home's got about 15, 20 years left before it tears down, right? So it looks kind of like that. So when we go in the attic, often newer insulation's been added on top. We dig and then we find that. So this is called vermiculite insulation. Now also on the duct for the furnace, you might see that white tape that was on all the joints and all that. That was asbestos tape. Best stuff on the planet because it doesn't burn, doesn't deteriorate, but people that use it a lot tends to get cancer out of it. And then it comes in many, many, many different sources. The older the home, the more you'll have. So WCB says any home that is built prior to 1995 should be tested for asbestos prior to doing a renovation. Now, the chance of finding asbestos in a house from the 90s is really, really low. But it's still possible. But the older it gets, 80s, 70s, 60s, and 50s, and the older you get, you have it in more material. You go for a house from the 20s, for example, you might have it in the floor, in the ceiling, on the paint. The paint will be lead paint as well, potentially. Asbestos in the drywall, asbestos on the exterior walls. It's all asbestos. It was a great product, because it didn't deteriorate and doesn't burn. So, but it's just that But keep in mind, asbestos is not a problem unless it becomes airborne for a long period of time. So if there's a renovation, the guy starts banging the wall, pulling drywall like this, throwing it in bag, the whole place all dusty, that could be a problem. You know, that's why they would have to create control zone, close all the doors, put ventilation, they put the wear mask, and they dispose of everything after that when they do this. So keep in mind asbestos, if your clients, because there's a lot of people that has clients that have heard all kinds of stuff. They're like, oh my God, I'm very concerned with asbestos. Asbestos is only to be dealt with when you're doing a renovation. So if in the attic, you would have, I'll take it back, like that other bag I showed you earlier. So in the attic, if you have that vermiculite, you don't need to remove it. Like most, if you would go on asbestos.com, they basically tell you to just leave it there, you know, and throw some more insulation on top, because disposing of it will be very expensive and it won't change a whole lot. It's not like it's going to be better or worse for your health. And normally houses that has that, they're very old house. This will be a tear down in probably the next 10, 15, 20 years anyways. So don't spend too much money on it, right? Because a builder will come and tear it down, right? So that's about asbestos here. Little clicker. Do you guys have any questions about asbestos or anything? I know it's a big subject out there and there's a lot of misinformation about it. But anyway, if you guys at one point have a client that can't snap out of it, feel free to tell this client to reach out to me personally. I'll be happy to talk to them about that. Lead paint. Now, lead paint, this was a big thing out there prior to 1978. So if it's a very old home and it has not been upgraded, because once in a while, like I did one from 1914 a few days ago, original carpet in there, original sinks, everything's original in there, right? So and it looks like it had never been painted. So the paint on that would likely be some lead paint. Now, lead paint, it's also another product that you don't want it to become airborne. You don't want to sniff it over a long period of time. But it's especially bad for toddlers, young kids, they'll develop brain damage and all kinds of stuff. So if you had window seals, for example, you got a toddler doing his teeth and he starts chewing on that seal, he might not be the best at school if that ever happens. So, and also pregnant women, if you were going to start sanding or whatever, pregnant women they'll have handicaps babies. It's just a terrible product. But keep in mind, good morning, keep in mind that most houses from that era has been repainted a few times already. So it's kind of, a lot of them will be already encapsulated. But, you know, sometimes, you know, in the commercial world, for example, you do churches or stuff like this, these things are fully original. So, but, you know, if you get a very old home, you might want to let your client know there is a chance he got lead paint, and that can be tested as well. We go there, we take samples, we send it to the lab and stuff like that. But again, if it's all chippy like this, then it's best to, you know, some people will hire a remediation company. They'll do all the control zones and put all the masks like they're going on the moon kind of, and they'll sand it and they'll get rid of it. But in most cases, if it looks not that bad, there are some paint that can go right over it that will encapsulate that whole thing. Okay, so lead paint before 1978.